Welcome to the Strong, Single and Human podcast, a real look at single parenting, how to navigate the ups and downs of life with kids on your own while keeping sane. We cover all manner of subjects from domestic violence, dealing with childhood trauma, through to fussy eaters and how to help your kids become resilient. I'm your host, Claire Martin. Welcome. This week's guest, Andrea, was raised on the mission fields of Seoul, South Korea. And as a third culture kid, she's familiar with navigating cultural diversity to find her own place of belonging. A family history of obesity showed up early, along with bulimia and depression. Her determination to become healthy, however, led to gastric bypass surgery and is a testament to her persevering spirit. She experienced early menopause at 39 and became an adoptive mother through private adoption at 42. Her personal journey of deconstructing her own assumptions, beliefs and conditioning produced her signature tool, intentional optimism. It provides the framework for how we do what we do. It's the attitudes and mindsets we employ and embody to live out our own values, goals, and dreams with excellence. This is the Strong, Single, and Human podcast. Hi, Andrea Johnson. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Claire. I'm so happy to be here.
No, I can't wait to talk to you about today's subject, because we're talking about personal core values, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm recognizing and identifying your own personal core values, because it's really important to actually be clear about what your core values are so that your little people can take on board good core values, right? Understand what your core values are. They can take it on. You can educate them. They can go out into the world and you can, well, not stop worrying, but you can just be relaxed and comfortable in the knowledge that they have good core values and they should make the right decisions based on their core values, right? That's how it should go.
Yeah, that's how it should go. I am going to say I would actually change the way that is worded by saying, so when we discover our own core values, these are our non-negotiables, right? These are not things that we take on. These are not things that come from outside. Those are values. Those are principles. Those are character traits, but our core values are the things we're born with. So the goal for doing this with children, and I wish I had known this, mine's 15, and I wish I had known this when he was 3 or 4. I wish I'd known my own and to know his, but he's adopted. And one of the things we've always said is, I can't wait to see how he blossoms as a flower, because I don't know. I don't know if he's going to be a peony or a rose or a daisy. I have no idea what he is going to look like, because there's no hint, genetically from me or my husband. He's adopted.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So for all of us, I think the goal is to raise our children with such beautiful self-awareness and authenticity, and to give them the courage to honor their own non-negotiables in a way that helps them have the kind of character that you want them to have, take on the kind of principles and community values or family values that you want them to have. So it's really more focused on, how do we discover in our children what their core values are and help them celebrate them? Because most of the time, what we do, because this is what is usually done to us, is we tell them to stop, or that's not important, or why do you have to be so sensitive about that? Or this is not a big deal, or those kinds. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, those kinds of things. And if I had known this 10 years ago, my relationship with my son back then would have been so different. But I was an older mom. I'm 42 when we adopted him at 9 weeks old. And I didn't know really how to parent. So I was learning from scratch. And for me to be able to look back now, and I have so many people asking this question, Claire, which is just lovely, is that how do I instill this in my children? And it's the ultimate in helping your child be their authentic self. And so that's what looking at core values for you can do, because then you can help your child do that for themselves and recognize it, and you can celebrate it in them. So that's where we're going to start. How's that?
That's perfect.
Okay.
That is perfect. Because also, I think my view is that you don't own your child,
Right.
right? I know you gave birth to your child. Okay, and that was great because you gave them life, right? But you don't own their life and you don't own them. And they're not there to fulfill what you wanted yourself to do in your life, right? It's not about putting those pressures on them to go, well, I wasn't a successful lawyer, or I wasn't a successful, I wanted to go on and be a doctor or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so instilling those things, I always laugh and say on here, people are probably sick of it. My son plays soccer. And for a period of time, he was like, I want to be the goalie. And that like devastated me because I was like, why do you want to be the goalie? Like the goalie just stands there, right? But that was what and because like, I'm always like, let's get out there. That's my personality, is to get out there and run around and go after stuff, right? And he was like, nah, I just want to be the hero when the ball comes towards me as such, right?
Yes.
And I had to, as a parent, I had to let go of that and go, if he wants to be the goalie, he wants to be the goalie. There are so many awesome goalies out there.
Gosh.
So let him do what he wants to do,
And having
right?
you tell that story, I'm thinking, well, my son doesn't play soccer anymore because he really just doesn't want anybody to tell him what to do. So practice is a no-go. But when he was playing soccer, he enjoyed being goalie because he didn't have to run around and get sweaty. I played goalie when I was in school, but as soon as you said he wants to play goalie, I'm like, ooh, he wants to be the hero. He wants to save the day, right? And so even just having this conversation, I'm hearing a difference in core values, because it may be for him that he doesn't need to be flashy all the time or out there all the time, but there's something in him that says, I want to protect. I want to, I want to make sure that things are secure. And, when you start digging into that, it's going to show up in all kinds of areas, even as young as 5, 6, 7, and 8. Maybe even earlier. My mother said to me, we lost her in 2017, but she used to say, you were the definition of a strong-willed child. And, I'm like,
that sounds like me.
But looking back now, knowing who I am and knowing my core values, my top core value is like thought authority. Like I still call it freedom of thought, right? Don't tell me what to think. Don't tell me how to get there. Don't tell me, none of it. We might come to the same conclusion, but I need to have my own authority to decide. And so for somebody to say to a 3-year-old who that's their wiring, do this because I said so. I'm like, oh, I think I actually said you're not the boss of me, like way back in the 70s. And, so, but when we look at our children and we see those things, I think understanding your personal core values gives you that ability to let go of making them in your own image, right? I followed, but that's something that we do. I think we're more aware of it now, but it still happens. And you said, obviously it still happens because you're talking about it. But when I was younger, I wanted so badly to fit in, and I was so different. And I'm the good girl. Everybody in my family was the good girl. It's like I'm a good girl and I follow all the rules, but I just thought different. I'm wired different. My sister's like, I don't understand why you have to do all this. And it's like, it's just who I am, girl. It's just who I am. And we have come to a place as adults to be able to say, I know you don't agree with me, but I need to tell you this because I want you to know how I'm feeling. And so now we are meeting each other where we are, but she was the kid that just had no problems getting in step. Like if we were in the snow, you would see her shoes just going snowshoes right in the path of my parents. And I was always like wandering off over here and over on this side and doing this thing and doing that thing. And you tell me I have to be on a continuum of yes or no. And I'm going to be like, well, what about this continuum or what about this spot over here that says maybe? That's me. And so when you want so desperately to fit in, and when that's part of your culture is being part of the quote, I don't use this word that often, but being part of the tribe, but just really just being accepted and made to feel welcome and like you belong, then we're going to dishonor our own core values in order to get there. And that's what happens along the way. So when you talk about working with children in this area, we've got to, number one, be aware of our own core values so that we don't try to imprint them on someone else like a child, because they're not anybody else's, they're ours. But we need to be able to live authentically enough that we enable them to develop an understanding of how to honor their core values. Because when you do that, they can create their own boundaries. They can create their own character. They don't have to work hard at it. There's so few people that I meet that understand what all of their top core values are. And most people that, like, if I'm in a coaching situation, I had one recently who she said, oh my gosh, I am the biggest perpetrator. I am the one who dishonors my core values the most. I said, yes, we are.
Yeah.
And
we are.
And until you know what they are, it's much easier to dishonor them and just be like, well, that person ticks me off, or I hate these kinds of situations, or get road rage, or I'm out of here, or I quit that job. I mean, I have a friend who I can't tell you how many jobs she's quit. And I'm like, well, you need to do your core value work, because then you'll know what the problem is, and it's just like,
wow.
Yeah.
How do we then get there, right? How do we recognize our own ones? Because I think I know some of mine, but like, this is the thing, right? When we got talking a few months ago, right, I sat there and I went, okay, core values, like, what are they? So I think let's go back to right back. What are core values? And I think we've touched on it a little bit, but what are our core values? What would we cast as core values? And then how do we identify them?
Okay. The simplest way I can say that, and this is not something I came up with, this has been around for a while. There are other people who talk about it. It is not proprietary information. However, this is the definition I use. Core values are the principles and priorities that guide your actions. They represent the foundational convictions that allow you to navigate complex life situations, all while keeping your identity and authority at the forefront. Bottom line, and it's a mouthful, but bottom line,
it is, but it's
they are your non-negotiables. They are the things that will cause you to say, hey, you're dead to me. Or they are the thing that when it's honored, it is the thing that brings you the most joy. Or it's someone that, like, if it's in a relationship, it's somebody that you feel this automatic attraction to because they probably honor your core values. So a few things about core values, they are those inner non-negotiable principles. I like to identify your primary and your secondary. So you can have anywhere from 3 to 5 primary that are like just literally a no-go. It's like, for instance, my second one is authenticity, which I think is the one that got most dishonored for me because I was always living with a mask. That sent me into bulimia and depression at a very early age. It sent me into I ended up in the excuse me, in a 12-week outpatient program for bulimia and depression when I turned 20 in the hospital. I weighed 310 pounds, had gastric bypass surgery. The things that we will do to compensate for a core value that's being dishonored are drastic, because when we talk about what are we coping for? What are our coping mechanisms there for? It's for that. So when I say it's a non-negotiable, it's the things that really matter. And if anybody loves you, they want to honor those, right? And it may be that they see them in you. A lot of times other people will see our core values before we do. We may be like, no, that's not me. And they're like, oh yeah, it is. You have some friends that'll say those things about you, don't you? Yeah, I see your face.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Or my mother. My mother will just sit there and like go, which is quite funny because my son is very similar to me, apparently. So I suppose that's good.
Well, but it should help you understand him a little bit better, right?
Oh, yeah,
But so
yeah.
here's some other things. Core values are elemental, just like a periodic table for, the elements. These are the things that are the building blocks. So they're elemental to you. They are inherent. They've been there forever. You should be able, when you start recognizing what they are, you should be able to look all the way back like I did at 3 years old and say, oh, that's what that meant. Or that's why when I'm having a theological conversation as almost seminary graduate with almost a graduate degree with a couple of pastors in Baltimore, and one of them looked at me because I joined a conversation with my husband, and one of them looked at me. Hang on. Joined the conversation with my husband, and one of them looked at me and said, "You wouldn't understand, little lady." I looked at my husband. I said, "I think I have to go to the bathroom," because I knew that the next thing that was going to come out of my mouth was not going to be, well, let's just say edifying. It was not going to be ladylike, as my mother would say. Having a core value of authenticity and thinking for myself, I literally told my husband later, I said, I can think circles around him. I can understand circles around that man. And I didn't understand why people, like in college, I had a friend tell me, yeah, I said, why doesn't this guy like, he's unfriendly to me. And he wasn't like a super attractive dude, but he played saxophone. He was kind of cool. And my friend said, well, he's a little intimidated by smart and pretty women. And I'm like, what? I mean, it was the smart and the pretty. And those two things together. So recognizing as I look back, these are things that are inherent. They're also present in all my relationships. So I have a relationship that is kind of distancing itself right now because this person needs me to agree with them on some things, on some fairly important things. And I'm like, this is what I believe. This is where I land. It's okay for me if we both believe something different, but that person's not okay with it. And so, and so it's hurting. But that just goes to the next point is they are what I call reciprocal. If I want to think for myself, I also want you to think for yourself. So I'm not going to give you all the answers. I'm going to ask you questions and I'm going to have you go find the answer. And I'm going to give you hints along the way, but I want you to come to the conclusion because otherwise I'm doing the very thing to you that I don't want done to me. So they're elemental, they're inherent, they're present in all your relationships, either honored or dishonored. They are reciprocal. They are your greatest joy or your deepest sorrow if you look back in your life. I'm terribly sorry. Whoever edits it's going to have some work to do. Laughing
It's
makes
me. Don't worry, it's
okay.
fine.
So that's basically what core values are, and being willing to take the time to say, all right, how do I uncover these for myself? Because most people, Claire, will live honoring at least in a way that honors at least one of their primary core values. There's usually just like one thing that people are like, that is it. I can't go any further. It's like, that's the line for me. Some people will live with two or three honored most of the time, but nobody lives in a way that just truly honors all of their core values unless they really know what they are. If somebody's really good at honoring or living in a way that honors like even their top 4 or 5 core values, they've probably done it by accident. You know, I mean, I love Enneagram stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Enneagram sevens are they're the enthusiast, and this is my sister, and so whenever anything is like uncomfortable, she's like, I'm out, right? Well, what that does is it means she honors her core values very well.
Oh,
So
okay. Because she's
right,
yeah,
so
she
she
recognizes.
doesn't want the pain. It's like that steps on a boundary. I'm out of here. So when we start, what we do is we look at how we do like a brain dump. We look at how you think other people, what would they say about you? Right? What would your mom say about you? what would your sister or your brother or your son say about you? And you create a nice big, like everything but the kitchen sink list of words. And if you want, like if you're in my core values course, I have a whole long list of keywords that'll kind of prime the pump.
Oh, you poor thing.
I know.
No,
I'm so
that's
sorry.
okay. I just feel it for you.
But you can also do some Google searches. I have clients who use Chat GPT to say things like, what are some keywords that might be a core value? But if it's anything that's outside of you, don't start there. Right. So I do workshops, and a lot of times I'll start with the statement, we're going to discover or help you uncover, or at least start uncovering your core values today. And it's like a half day workshop. So it's no joke, right? It's like we're there for 4 hours.
Wow.
Yes.
It's not a small
If you tell
exercise.
me that family, faith, and country are your top core values, we will start over. And I actually had a guy push back halfway through and say, I'm going to leave family in there. And I'm like, well, tell me why. And so he started talking about all these things that he loved about his family. And I said, okay, so what I'm hearing is belonging. I'm hearing camaraderie. I'm hearing humor. I'm hearing, and he said, well, yeah, all those are part of my family. I'm like, the core values underneath that. Your family is how it plays out. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, it definitely does. It definitely does. So, how many core values can you have? Can you have like 3 or 4, 20? Like,
I
how many would you say there
Well, when we talk
are?
about primary and secondary, I usually help people I try to get them to narrow it down to a primary of 3. And then because we go to like a 10 keywords and then a top 5. And I have a free exercise too. You don't have to buy a course or anything from me. It's just a 1-pager that's real easy. It just doesn't give you all the keywords. It doesn't give you the cheat sheet stuff, but it's the same process. And when you narrow them down, you start to see how some of them will be like, oh, you know what? Respect is related to this one. And validation is related to security. And so a lot of times we'll kind of put them in buckets. Like we'll start with 20 and and we'll put them in buckets. And then you come up with your own definitions. So I say 3, but I have one client who insisted on 4. That's no problem. These are yours. They're not mine. She's a solopreneur and she's a mom, and she took her core values and turned them into her mission and vision for her business. So not only does she use, yeah, so it's really getting to the place where you understand yourself in a way that you probably haven't before.
And in understanding your core values, we get onto the kids in a minute, but in understanding your core values, does that mean that your life becomes happier, more content, because you understand what your core values are, and then you can understand what your triggers are and and how to deal with and manage those things?
Ultimately, yeah.
Okay.
Ultimately,
cool. That was a simple answer.
Sure. Ultimately, I'm trying not to cough. Tell you, it's the best core workout having bronchitis. Yeah. Ultimately, yes, you get to that place. I would be lying if I said just understanding your core values is just going to place you in this different universe, because it doesn't. Because you're then going to be aware. This is where I talk about my ABCs, aware, your assumptions, your beliefs, and your conditioning. You're going to be aware of all the assumptions you've been making. You're going to be aware of all the beliefs that have trampled on your core values for years. And you're going to also be aware of all the conditioning that brought you to the place where you are today. Now, when you're aware of something, it's an invitation to examine it and change it. Some things are going to need to be changed. So sometimes, like I also say this to people, the reason why many of us don't do the work is because there are 2 reasons. We're either afraid of what we're going to find. And I'm going to tell you, there are no bad core values. There are none. And I had a guy say to me, well, what if ego is a core value? And I'm like, Really?
Why would you?
You really think ego is going to be a
Yeah,
core value?
why?
You really want that? And you want everybody to have the ego that you have? And he goes, okay, it doesn't fit the definition. Like it doesn't, you
No.
know? So, so as long as so the first thing that we're not willing to do is we think they're going to be something bad and they're not. The second piece is a lot of people will immediately realize as soon as I know what these are, I'm going to have to make some changes. And then that it's off the table.
Wow.
I got too much going on in my life. It's too hard. This relationship would have to end. And that's really drastic, right? We go there sometimes. And especially, like I'm not divorced. I don't know what it's like to be a single parent. I don't know what it's like to have a new job that's just all the things. I mean, like crazy. But I do know what it's like to have to examine 50 years of conditioning that told me it was not okay to think for myself. There was never a direct, Andrea, don't think for yourself. Was, of course, think for yourself. It was, these are the respected people who give us the proper answers. These respected people interpret things for us this way. These respected people have the education that can allow them to answer a question better than you ever could. And that's so tempting. There are ways in which I still do that. I'm just much more discerning who I listen to. I'm much more discerning now. And I had to like jettison a lot of beliefs and conditioning because I had allowed those things to take the place of thinking for myself.
Well, and also the challenge is, right, that you want to fit in. And if it is family or
Oh, yeah,
friends, and people that, you like and you respect, right, at the end of the day, that are telling you these things, then you sort of
absolutely.
go, I want to fit in, right? So to fit in, I'm going to just have to suck it up, sister. And, maybe I am, maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe I'm
Mm,
wrong. And so, yeah, it's difficult. And I can understand some people not even wanting to start to go down that core value, um, recognizing their core values. Because I would imagine it's pretty scary to have to come face to face with the fact that maybe you haven't been living your core value. Maybe you haven't been living authentically as you
right.
for the last 50 odd years or whatever, 30 years, 40 years or whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe it's why I had bulimia and depression. Maybe it's why, and I know this is not a blanket statement again, I'm not divorced, but maybe it's why I got a divorce. Maybe it's why I got fired from my job.
oh,
Maybe it's why
it
these
so
things
is for
happened to
me.
me, right? Because I was not living in a way that honored my core values and I had had enough and something blew. Or I wasn't myself and they could tell and I just didn't show up. Because here's the deal, Claire, you are beautiful the way you are. You are made for a specific purpose. I believe that each of us was made uniquely with this beautiful stuff that we're supposed to bring to the table. And if you show up to the table without the stuff you're supposed to bring, we don't have a full meal.
No, that's right. That is
So,
right.
yeah,
And I try and instill that in my son, that he's a 1 in 4 billion chance of being born, right? And he needs to be his authentic self, right? He needs to actually understand. He's not going to understand authenticity at 8, right?
right.
But it's about trying to encourage him to understand that he's not a bad person. He's not like, there are going to be people out there that aren't going to agree with him and he isn't going to get on with everyone, right? But that's okay. That's
Right.
fine. And I think that was one of my challenges growing up, was I wanted to get on with everyone and I couldn't understand why I couldn't work with certain people and why other people just annoyed the hell out of me. And it was a clash of values, potentially, is what we're saying.
Potentially. And I think as
And that's
parents,
okay.
yeah, as parents, the real challenge is to look at what is normal childhood development, what is and what is core value infringement, right? Because there's a certain, and that means, unfortunately, we have to be educated on all of that. we have to know what is normal at 8, at 15, right? And there are times my husband and I look at each other and go, is this a 15 thing or is this like, what's going on here? And because it's been a long time since I was 15, I'm 57. So, and I wasn't a boy. And of course, I was fitting in.
I hear you. I'm all of those things. Yeah, I'm like 52. I've got a boy. I don't understand what he's going through.
So bravo for you. But I think that's the challenge, is being willing to say, all right, I have to be the adult here. I have to be educated enough to know these are normal developmental things for an 8-year-old. And these are normal, these are things that are showing up as core values. Because I think that your example at the very beginning of soccer, you wanting to be like the forward or the striker or whatever, and he wanted to be the goalie, is a beautiful example of you've got a core value that's different from his. I really, that's the kind of thing that jumps out at me that I can see automatically. So.
And I have to stop myself so many times because I'm very much getting in there. I'm very much like chasing so if I was to play soccer, right, just to give a little insight, if I was to play soccer, I would be getting in there, chasing every ball, like wanting to win every ball and all of this stuff. Not really what he wants to do, right? But that's not to say that what he's doing by standing back, assessing the situation, making sure he's in the right spaces and not chasing a ball, right? Not to say that that's not the right thing. Do you know what I mean? My way may not be the right thing for the situation that he's in, right? So yeah, and I have to be very cognizant that mummy's not standing on the sideline going, come on, go run for the ball, go and do it. So yeah. So it's about trying to teach and educate, but not squash their own natural ways of doing things, right? Which is very hard. But yeah, exactly. And that's the whole thing. So, okay. So one of the hardest there, so this is the 2-phaser then, because you really need to recognize your own core values. And then it's about how do we help our children live their core values, right? Because it's about helping them live their core values, which might be very different from ours.
It's going to start off with you. Well, because here's the thing. Sometimes what if your core value, you need it honored so badly that you infringe on his, right? It's like that's where some of the conflict comes from. And this is a beautiful example too, just because it's not for you. You're not insisting that he be like you. And so it's this idea that he could actually have something different in him that's wired differently. He's probably much more strategic. He's probably like playing chess in his mind, watching the ball, watching the way the players are reacting. Because the goalie, just like in American baseball, the catcher is like the brains of the game, right? It's the goalie is like the brains of the game. They know what's going on. They probably can tell you who that person's going to pass it to and how that's going to happen. So there's something going on there that we have to recognize. But as parents, a lot of times, if we don't know who we are, then we're not comfortable with someone else expressing who they are. And so this is basic humanity 101. We each get to be who we are. And so as parents, if we know what our core values are, if we're willing to look at them, then we have to be willing to let our kids do the same thing. And it is a constant reminder because one of the exercises when you uncover your core values, we don't just leave you there, right? It's not like, okay, here they are, ta-da. Then you have to learn to integrate them. You have to learn to implement and integrate them into everything, into your family, into your leadership. That idea of people wanting to, or me not wanting anybody to tell me what they think. My mother used to do this. She would say, isn't this a beautiful picture? Don't you love this? And I'm like, I just don't know how to answer that. But I didn't want to hurt her feelings because she'd be like, why not? Don't you like my stuff? And I'm like, I love you. And, but there was no good way to answer it. And it wasn't until I figured that out that I realized, oh, it's because she's telling me how to think.
Yes. Wow, that's
My
very.
husband does the same thing. And I think it's a core yeah, I think it's a
Oh,
core value
wow.
somewhere in there of um it's something about belonging or camaraderie or maybe even validation for them. And so when I say no, I'm invalidating, right? But with my husband, it's usually, yeah, it would use because I met him in grad school. And so, like I said, I love the thinky, brainy things, So we'll have these long theological conversations and philosophical conversations. And that's one of the things I love about him is he loves for me to do that. Let's go, right? But he'll say, "Wouldn't you agree that?"
You go,
And I used to not know,
no.
right? I'm like, I don't know how to respond to that. And so a lot of times I'll say, well, it used to be, I would say, well, tell me everything, and then I'll tell you whether or not I agree. Finally, when I realized it was a core value that was being stepped on, I said, can we just rephrase that? So now he says, what do you think about this? Which opens the door to a conversation and communication. We might end up totally agreeing. But if we don't, he's asked me what I think. So if it's theology or politics or family situation, he's asked me what I think. He's honored me, right? And so I can't get upset if he doesn't agree with me. I'm just like, well, okay, right? Because it's my core value. And so he's now seeing that played out in the relationship. And that's how it works for us. I do that with my son. It's so much easier to say, you need to do as I say. Can I have the computer? No. Why? Seriously? I mean, it's just, when I go to those, I'm like, all right, well, let me explain to you. I have 17 minutes before an interview starts. I'm trying to blow dry my hair. And is the Wi-Fi working? And he's like, well, it's not working on my Chromebook. Well, do you think the Wi-Fi is going to work on the computer if it's not working on your Chromebook? Well, it was working for dad earlier. I'm like, use it. Think. Yeah, think just a minute. And so and then he goes, oh, the Wi-Fi's out. I'm like, yeah, the Wi-Fi's out. I mean, he got there on his own, but it took a minute and we almost had a fight about I said no. And why? No, because I said so, right? It's like that's where honoring my core value in someone else, like allowing them to do that, made it so that we didn't have a fight. And let me tell you, a fight with a 15-year-old who's taller than you and bigger than you,
Oh my
not a
God,
great idea.
don't. I know, don't go there. I'm
Don't even
dreading
start.
it. My son is 8 and up to my shoulders, right? So when he's 15, we're going to be in the same position, right? And I keep sitting there. I'm very strong-willed. I'm very independent, right? So here we go. These are all my core values. So I don't like being told what I can and can't do, right? If somebody says, you can't do that, I'm going to prove them wrong, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
Very much like you in the fact that I don't like people telling me what to think and all of those things. So we're going to have a big chat. We're going to have a bit of a chat. But yeah, he's a very empathetic kid. And it's
Mm.
quite funny what you said about the security and the being the hero and the safety and all of that sort of thing and
Sure.
saving the day. Yeah.
But he's protecting his whole team.
Very much so. Very much. And it
Right?
is very much about protection with him, right?
So as
And
soon
it's
as we
like,
start looking,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, no,
It's like
no.
what?
It's like when I go out. Oh, mummy, where are you going? How much are you going to drink? What are you like? I'm like, oh my God, it's like living with my mum, right? It's
Yeah, I
like
was gonna
living with
say,
my mum and dad because he's like, no, no, no. Like, who are you going with? And I'm like, Jesus, like, who's the adult here, right? And he just gets very. I mean, it's partly due to our situation as well, but he gets
sure,
very anxious
sure,
about
sure.
where I'm going and who I'm being with and what I'm doing and don't get drunk.
Yeah.
And like he polices what I'm drinking. And I'm like, and it's not as though I drink very much. I'm 52. I can't deal with drink. And I sit there and I look at him and I go, oh my God, if you'd have been around in my 20s and my 30s, you would have had a different experience. So, yeah, no,
Well,
exactly.
but when we start looking below behavior for what I would maybe call the root cause, that's when core values start showing up. So I'm also a DISC consultant, which is behavioral analysis, which is all in communication. And um, I usually start with people in a corporate setting with more of a DISC assessment because it'll tell me what kind of communicator they are. It'll also tell me what their basic motivations are, and it's a concrete place for them to start. Because Claire, not everybody's ready to start with this. It's going to sound like, oh, woo woo, belly button staring. I'm going to go in deep inside. They're not all ready for that. But
What
when I
is
start
disc?
there,
What is
oh, okay.
disc?
So
Sorry,
DISC
because
is,
I don't know if we
um,
have it over here.
oh, you
I've
do.
not
It's
heard of it.
available.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
it, yeah, it's available. It is some people call it a personality test, but it's not. It's a behavioral analysis type indicator, and it's based on, Marsden. Have you heard of like the four temperaments, like choleric and phlegmatic and sanguine and melancholy? Okay, well, it's
No.
based on really,
Oh,
really old
okay.
stuff. And so basically, when you take the assessment, it takes like 10 minutes. It's super easy. You can do this for kids too. It plots you out on an XY axis, and you fall on this XY axis somewhere. We have a little bit of everything in us, but DISC actually stands, it's a DISC, and it stands for, it's an XY axis. The Y axis is from extroverted, outgoing to reserved. And the X axis is people oriented versus task or process oriented. So the top left quadrant, who are people oriented and task oriented, are the D's. They're about 3% of the population. They're very bottom
Wow.
line. They're very results oriented. These are your drivers of the bus. Okay.
Yeah,
You
these are the
need a
ones that
D
would
on your,
annoy me.
well, maybe, but a lot of times they're the ones who actually make your project happen, right? You need a good D in there to actually get the project going. They're not as bossy as people think they are. They're
Oh,
just going to
okay.
they're going to subvert you. They're going to go around because they're results oriented. Okay. So, and they also don't like their authority to be undermined. That's the D. Okay. So the top right hand quadrant, which is both outgoing and people oriented, are the I's. These are your inspirational or influential people, about 11% of the population. I'm a high I. We love to tell stories. We love to connect with people. We are very relatable. We're usually funny when we're not coughing. We love to be in the mix. There are some people who, like Robin Williams was an I, right? I mean, these are the people that show up and they're like, oh, they're here. We can start the party, right? But they also have this fear of being rejected. So eyes are very prone to wearing a mask, which is kind of where I came, that's what came out for
Wow.
me.
Yeah.
The bottom right hand quadrant is the S's, which is the people and task or reserved oriented, right? So they are much more these are your classic, they're called steady, so these are your classic don't rock the boat people. These are your people who
Right.
are going to be all the ones,
Just get on with
yeah,
it.
well, they're going to be on the bus and they don't want you to veer off the road. They don't want you to they don't want you to go left and you're supposed to go right. If you're familiar with the change curve, these are the people on the bottom end of the change curve, right? You know how many percentage they are of the population?
Oh, I don't know, 57.
69. Yeah, almost 70.
Oh, there we go.
This is why change is difficult. These are usually your bossy
Wow.
people because you're stepping out of line, my friend. All right. So,
Right.
but I wouldn't be able to have a business without my steadies.
No,
I don't
no, no,
follow
no.
through
I
with
completely
anything.
agree.
I don't follow through with any.
Yeah.
It's just, I've had to learn all these systems to make myself do that. So it's the behavior and communication. But the bottom left quadrant is the C, which is the creatives or the compliance. And these people are task and reserved oriented. Okay. So they're your quiet ones. They might be creatives like your musicians or your artists, or they could be more task oriented and numbers focused like your accountants and your CPAs, that kind of thing. They're only about 13% of the population. I think my math is right. I'm not sure.
Oh,
I
that's
could be
okay.
wrong. Don't add it up.
We're not going
No,
to
one of your
test you.
listeners is going to say that doesn't make 100. Like, well, one of them's
Yeah,
wrong.
right.
Um, so when you know where you fall on the quadrants, there are specific patterns that we have because the S's don't want they need security. The C's, the C's want to get it right. So they're going to ask you, like, if you've ever gone to somebody and said, I need you to do this project, or to your son and say, I need you to clean your room, or I need you to do this, I need you to help me with this thing. And they ask you, 10 other questions. And you're like, just do it. Well, they're not asking because they question you. They ask because they want to do it right. They ask because they want to do it the best way. So when you understand some of the patterns, like a D, if you've got somebody who's like, just give me the too long, didn't read, right? Move on. If you've got an I who's like going to be in your space, telling a story on a podcast interview, even though she's coughing, that's an I, right? The steadies are the ones who don't want change. You have to convince them of change. You have to convince them that everything is going to be fine, even if we do change. And then your C's are the ones that just need all the answers. Once you know that, you know how to communicate with people. When you take that and layer it with your core values, and you say, okay, not only is this person a steady primarily, but their core value is their top core value is respect. So every time, or let's put this in the C category. So, because that's a little easier. Every time, because they ask questions, right? So every time they ask me a question and I'm like, can you just do it? I'm disrespecting their need for answers and to do it right. So when you start
and to be honored,
yes, and to be honored with that, and they want to respect me, but eventually they're going to blow their top because, right? So when you do this and you look at those kinds of things along with core values in your kids, right? When you see, oh, I think he's more strategic. I think he's very into protection. I think he's into stability. Maybe he's a high S. Maybe I am a high I or a high D. And that's why he's asking me how much alcohol I'm drinking, because he wants to make sure that you're going to come home. Right. Or it could be, you know what I mean? He could be an SC. My husband and my son are both high Cs, which means I get questions all the time. So, but
he's definitely not a C. He doesn't really ask lots of questions, but he's very independent. He just wants to get on with do. He's out on his bike at the moment. Like, well, not obviously at the moment because it's early in the hours of the morning, but like he wants to go out and go on his bike and visit his mates. Mum, I want to go out.
Before school?
Need to. No. This is at weekends and things like that. So, Mum, can you just message such and such because I want to know if they're about, because I want to go over and see them. And then he'll go out on his bike and then they'll go roaming out on their bike. And they're 8 and 9, which panics the hell out of me. But he's got like such helicopter parenting. We didn't have this in my day, but he's got like a phone watch. So it's not a phone, but he can phone me on the phone watch just to tell me, oh, I need your help, or I need you to pick me up, or my bike's got a puncture, or I'm just going from this house to this house because I'm going to go play over here or whatever. Yes. So at least I'm not worrying about him.
Yeah. But when you understand those things and you start viewing the way he communicates with you through the patterns of not just anxiety because of your situation, but that's valid and that's real. But when you can start pulling those spaghetti strings apart and start saying, oh, you know what, this is a disc this is a behavioral thing. This is how he needs information. This is how he needs me to communicate or how he communicates with me. And these are core values where I've been dishonoring those by not communicating with him well or by not doing this. And when you can help him see those things, then he will be able to own them and honor them and set internal boundaries. It's amazing. It's like primary and secondary core values are like, I have a big yard and I have a house and people can walk on my road. I'm in the country, so I don't have a sidewalk. And so they can walk. I let them walk inside my property line. They don't have to stay on the road. It's 45-mile-an-hour road. So I let them walk on my property line, but nobody walks up to my front door and walks in. It's a very clear boundary that is just generally accepted. You knock, you ring the doorbell. I have the opportunity to open it. And when you do that work that we talked about earlier, when you get comfortable with honoring your core values and knowing what they are, then it's like you've got your house with the door properly shut. It doesn't mean keeping people out. It means you get to let the people in that you want in. That's because we talk about boundaries as if there's something we set out here, as if it's a line people don't cross. That's behavior. I'm My core values get honored in here. I told my husband the behavior that would change how he could honor me. But I was fighting with that boundary line until I got comfortable with that internal boundary. I was fighting with it until I said something.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And it is recognizing that, right? If you don't know what your core values are, you're just going to find a person annoying, right? But not understand why. And it's because their terminology and they won't know what your core values are, or maybe they will recognize them, but they won't know how it's affecting you internally.
Yeah.
And how, and how they can change because they've got their own core values.
Right. And I promise you, when you know if both of you, I can't get my husband to do the exercise. I can't even get him to do it. Right. He's a CS, right? It's like no change. But we've done Enneagram, so he's willing to talk that. So I kind of weave it in.
Okay. Phew.
But when you have two people who have done that, like I've worked in teams at organizations where we started with DISC and said, okay, now take this to your team, take this to your supervisor, tell them how you need to be communicated with in the best way. Okay, great. They do that. Now we're going to work on your core values. And as soon as we started working on core values, they're like, no wonder I don't get along with this person, or no wonder what they do bothers me, or no wonder we can't get anything done in this meeting. Okay, figure out the best way, now that you know what they are, to take your core values into a meeting and say, and you don't even have to tell people what they are. You can actually just start talking differently yourself. I'd be curious to know if, or how can we make this, what are the outcomes of this meeting supposed to be? It's like, it just depends on how you approach it based on who you are. You don't have to tell everybody what your core values are. I do it because I talk about it, right? And one of my clients did it because she made it part of her mission and vision. But you don't have to tell anybody what your core values are. You just need to live them. And if you do it in a way that, these are like the three pillars of the work that I do. It's the know who you are, which is your core values, know how you communicate, which is your disc wiring. And then the last piece for me is live it out with intentionality, integrity, and grace, which is what I call intentional optimism, which is my business name. So integrating your core values, and if you talk about or think about how can I help my children do this, that's where taking your core values and putting into place life principles or family values or principles that you want to honor as a family, that's going to give them the opportunity to develop their core values. And I usually say it like this: if you want to borrow intentional optimism for a while, if they work for you, awesome. It's 6 tenets. I got you here. It's a downloadable. You can do that. But if you already have a set of family principles or values, that you want to say, this is how we show up as a family, your core values will then inform that and help them to understand their own in a way that they can then honor. Because here's the deal. We owe it to the next generation to help them grow up with an awareness that we didn't have.
Yes. Yeah, no, I completely agree. God love the 70s and the 80s, but thank God for 2020 and going forward, because I think we're starting. Don't know how quickly we can do it, but I think we're starting to actually look at and understand that we're human beings now. Mm. So with all the mental health discussions that are going on and all of the things that are happening, I'm not sure we're producing a lot of tools to help us with Instagram and all of these things that create a false life. Yeah. But it's a work in progress, everyone, right? Yeah. And I think we're now starting to recognize via some of these tools that people are having mental health problems, and there are a lot of subjects that are now being talked about and are now being discussed.
Yes.
We have a lot of domestic violence issues over here at the moment. I'm sure they're all over the world, right? They're not just in Australia, but it's now being spoken about. Good. And I know a lot of women are writing about it, but men are taking what's being written and actually saying it in their own words. Good. We should be stopping this from happening. So it's amazing the turnaround that's actually going on. So that's awesome. But look, where can people find you if they want to go and find out what their core values are, whether they want to do one of your courses or whether they want to just download the freebie, where can they find you?
Yeah, I am the Intentional Optimist. So theintentionaloptimist.com makes it pretty simple. And on the very homepage, right at the top, there's a button above my head that says free core values exercise. If you click on that, you get a downloadable, and it's easy. You can do it yourself. If it's not enough, like on my website, there's tools, but if you get that downloadable, it'll give you a start and it'll give you a taste. And here's what I want to say. I didn't say people aren't willing to do the work to scare you. I said that to make you aware there's work involved. Okay. So if you do that downloadable and realize, I'm just not ready for this, that's okay. There may be too many things going on in your life right this second, but I will tell you, you will never regret doing it. Ever.
Yeah. No, I agree.
At the bottom of that page is how you can do the core values course. It's also on my website. I have a new product out that is not on my website, and it's core values coaching. So you get access to the course, and I think I might actually change it to 6 meetings with me, because I'm noticing as my clients finish up, we might need one more meeting. And the more I talk to people, so it's still in a little bit of development. But the more I talk to people like you, I realize I might need to put something into that course, especially in the coaching, about how core values, how we can actually do this in our families and do this in our children. So I so appreciate I appreciate the ability, and I'm so honored to be able to talk to you and your audience. Thank you for that privilege. And if y'all are listening, and you can tell I'm from the South in America, if y'all are listening and you have not yet rated this podcast, you need to know Claire is asking, and she gave me this list of questions that were just phenomenal. And I think we've touched on most of them. She's so thoughtful, and she really does a beautiful job of looking for looking for the things that are going to benefit you. She definitely has you in mind. So don't stop now, but as soon as you're done, go down and give her a 5-star review if you haven't done it, because as a podcaster myself, it matters so much.
It does. It definitely does. It definitely does. Look, thank you for your kind words.
Sure.
I started this during COVID to keep myself sane, right? Yeah. And I'm now in my 4th year.
Me too.
It's June.
I started mine during COVID as well.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
I can't believe it's been going for 4 years.
Yeah. I'm surprising myself. I'm at 185, 186 episodes. And I started mine because I was listening to a podcast, and it was a speaking coach. And she said, "Is your next stage a podcast?" I stood up. I was weeding my garden. Of course, I was supposed to be working from home, but I was weeding my garden. And to nobody in particular, I said, yes, it is. And so I have a podcast called Stand Tall and Own It, where you can hear a lot of this stuff as well. But I also, if you're on those dreaded social media places, I respond to DMs on LinkedIn and Instagram. And if you tell me you heard me here on Claire's podcast, I will know you're not spam. So I will respond to you. I respond to all of them myself. And I'll let Claire know, hey, people were listening. So because as a podcaster, it's really nice to know that someone else is listening.
Yes, no, definitely. Yeah, you can see the stats, but it's nice to have that interaction and know that people are actually listening, and what you're producing is actually
matters.
Making a difference in people's lives. Look, thank you for coming on board. Thanks for talking about core values, because it's so important. It's like, it is the core of us, right? It's what makes us human, right? Yeah. And our own individual little person, right? Yeah. It's almost like it's our spirit, our core spirit. And it's what leaves an impression on people, is who we are.
It makes you. And when you're you, whether you think you're a leader or not, because I am a transformational leadership coach, right? So I take people from disempowered to magnetic, right? And you don't have to be somebody in a management position or a CEO. You lead the person in the mirror first, and you lead all the little people around you second, and then you lead everybody else after that, right? So you are a leader, and it is imperative that you do that job well. So give yourself the gift of knowing yourself. Think for yourself. Figure out and uncover your core values. If you need help, I'm here. And I'm happy to do it. And so I think that that's the biggest piece is when we know who we are, we can show up as ourselves.
Yeah. And I think there's no better ending to this podcast than what you just said. Look, thank you again. And I wish you the best of luck. And looks like I've got some core value work to do for me before I then start to help my son. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast and you would like to hear more, please hit subscribe wherever you like to hear podcasts. If you would like to support us further, share this episode with your friends and family. And finally, drop us a review on iTunes, as I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, and ideas. It all helps me to understand and produce awesome content you want to hear just like this. If you want to check out our past episodes, write to us, appear on the podcast, or for links, resources, and show notes, go to our website, www.strongsingleandhuman.com. We are also on all the usual social media platforms, Insta, Facey, and Twitter. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope to see you back here again soon. Be kind to yourself, and remember, no one is perfect. We're all just putting one foot in front of the other and doing our best. I'm Claire Martin, and you've been listening to the Strong, Single and Human podcast.